her bio. So next time, please send it. Let's see, make sure we get your slides up first. Hold on. Make sure. Yes, okay. Our next speaker is Dr. Hilary VanHorn Gatlin. She's from Kaiser Permanente, and after listening to all these, the science that's going on, all the trials that are going on, I'm sure your head is filled. Which direction do you go? What choices do you make? And I asked Hilary if she would kind of take on the task of talking about guilt when you're trying to make decisions for your child's treatment. So she fondly agreed to take on this very tough topic. So I'll have Hilary talk to you about a little bit about guilt in the treatment selection process. Hilary.
Thank you, Pat. So my name is Dr. Hilary VanHorn Gatlin, and I have the double curse of being too short for the podium and going right before lunch. So, well played, Pat. I want to start by getting to know you, because I don't recognize a lot of faces here. So I'm curious, if you'd be willing to raise your hands. I have bad news for you. This is a very participatory talk, because I need to keep you awake and thinking. All right. Good job, Brandon. Hand raised for no reason. Points for you. Okay. So who here has a child who's been diagnosed in the last 6 months? Thank you. Last year? 2 years? Thank you. 3 to 4 years? Okay. And then 5 years or greater? All right. So my veteran parents, you have, I would say, your voice is deeply important in this very participatory talk. So I have nothing to disclose. I want to talk about the cost of choice. In the United States, we have an immense amount of choice, and this never really hit home to me until my brother and sister-in-law moved to Ireland. And I went to buy dish soap at the store. And I go to the store, and guess how many brands of dish soap there are in Ireland? You got it, Brandon. There's one brand of dish soap. So if you want to go somewhere in Ireland and buy something, you have one choice. You go to the United States and you want to buy dish soap, and if you're like my husband, you're going to call me and say, there's 70 types of dish soap. Do you want, let's start with the basics, foaming versus not foaming, right? There's so much choice. And in a lot of ways, choice gives us control. I would argue that choice is also a curse. And we're going to talk about that today. And this is going to be, like I said, a participatory conversation, because it's before lunch. And this is about us learning from each other, leaning on each other, knowing that we're not alone, and really creating a sense of community and thinking about this. And I would say for the physicians in the room, we are, I would say, even more aware of the heavy weight and exhaustion emotionally of choice with COVID. And I want to just think about that as just a microcosm, just an inch of what you guys are going through every single day. So I want to go back to before cancer. What is the first choice that you have to make when you find out you're having a child? Ladies? Yeah, what multivitamin to take, right? I mean, it's that basic, right? And then you sit there in the store and you're staring at the multivitamins and you're like, oh my God, do I go omegas or not omega, right? And then we go to everything else that goes into it. And I'll go to this in a second. Hold on. What's the right crib? Everybody has an opinion on the crib. Everybody has an opinion on the car seat. Everybody's car seat's better, right? What car to drive, in fact? Is it a safe enough car? Are the airbags the right airbags? I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. We are overwhelmed by choice. And when our child's diagnosed with cancer, before we even get there, there's the question of who makes the choices and the weight of who is making the choices and the pressure of the person who wants to give permission for the other person to make the choices. So I want to go back to a quote from this is from a good friend of mine. This is not even a patient of mine. This was a good friend whose son fortunately finished treatment a couple years ago. And this is what she said to me. I still wonder constantly if I made the right decisions. I lay awake at night sometimes just thinking, should I have said yes to that other clinical trial? And I know he's okay, and I know I should feel grateful, but I am still, to this day, consumed with guilt over things that may or may not have gone well, or been right, or been wrong. And that is the cost, isn't it? Because it's not that simple, is it? It's not as simple as right or wrong. Even when it feels like we've got no choice, we're still being asked to make decisions. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what that looks like for parents. I mean, you know what it looks like. Uh-oh. I did something, I'm sorry. This is my first in-person presentation since COVID. I'm clearly a little... Okay, there we go. Thank you. So let's talk about the guilt tango. So here are some commonly reported stressors. And if you've experienced this, I want you to just raise your hand, okay? A sense of powerlessness. Thank you. Feeling that you missed something, like it was so obvious. If you just noticed a month ago, there was this one thing that happened. What are the right choices? You could be next door to somebody else that's like, oh, I chose this. Oh, you chose that arm? Oh, and then it's the silence. And then you're sitting there thinking, what does O mean? Inability to stop the side effects. I can't take it away. This is a huge one. I gave this to my child. What if I gave this to my child? There's increasing research around, did I somehow do this to my child? There we go. Fear that something preventable caused it. Thank you. Worry about the parenting failures. Right? And the parenting failures change. The parenting fails before cancer and the parenting fails after cancer are different. You know, I always give the sleep analogy. You know, before cancer, your child comes out of bed and they're like, hey, I want to sleep with you. And you're like, no, you walk them back to the bed. The nights after your child has cancer that you walk them back to your bed, you lay awake thinking, I shouldn't have walked them back to their bed. I should have put them in bed with me one more night. Spending less time with siblings. Worry that the siblings are going to be okay. Guilt about what you can't do. And here's another big one for the parent that's staying home holding down the fort, or the other family members that are taking on that role, the guilt there. Yep. And the reality is that we know that the guilt is worse at certain times. The two greatest times that people feel overwhelmed by choice and by guilt are when there are big decisions to make or there's a time pressure. And guilt looks different on different people, doesn't it? Some of us, we manage our guilt by doing lots and lots of research, asking all the questions, going onto the websites. I see you nodding and looking here. You're going to get in trouble with your wife. But you do all the research, right? You go onto all the group chats and you ask all the things, and it's helpful for a second, and then it's even more confusing because everybody has an opinion. And why do we feel so strongly about our opinions, guys? They're ours, and we are just praying and hoping that we made the right one ourselves. Every single one of us. Of those of you here right now, how many of you feel like you're doing the absolute best you can for your child? Thank you. Of those of you here right now, who tell yourself, who reminds yourself that you're doing the best you can for your child? That is a very small number. We do not give ourselves nearly enough grace. And instead, the guilt feeds this anxiety and this stress. And some of us get really, really busy and we look for all the information and then we're more confused than when we started. And some of us will shut down. The coping is very, very different based on the person. So I'm curious if anybody would be willing to share. When is the guilt worst for you? Maybe a parent who's been doing this for, let's say, 5+ years. Yes.
We've been doing this since 2011. The guilt is really bad when she says it.
Mm-hmm.
She's 14.
Mm-hmm.
So she's very opinionated.
Mm-hmm.
And we do a lot of crafting. She has her own little thing she does. She always let me know that she the boss. But I do a lot of the work.
Uh-huh.
And I asked her, I said, if you the boss, why I'm doing all the work? And she said, that's what the secretary's supposed to do. And I had got this stamp that we've been stamping on her bags that said made with love.
Mm-hmm.
And she loves to draw. She draws on herself all the time. And I knew that if I put that stamp down, she was going to stamp herself. I just knew it. But I said, let me go ahead and do it for you. And I stamped her.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, why would I want that stamp? And I said, because you were made with love.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, no, I wasn't. I said, yes, you were.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I planned you. I talked to God. I said, it better be a girl. All that type of stuff. I broke it down to him like we were friends. And she was like, well, you were selfish and vain with that one. I said, wait, what? You know, it hit me in the face like, really? She was like, well, I don't feel like I was made with love because every day my body hurts.
Yeah.
I am diseased. It's your fault. I am diseased. Every day I am hurting. I'm not normal. I go back and forth to the doctor all the time. You should have prayed for him to make me healthy. And I said, I did, didn't I? And I went back to my room and I cried.
Yeah.
And I know she was not trying to hurt my feelings, because that was how she was feeling at the time.
Exactly.
And I just had to say, did I actually ask for her to be healthy? I know it had to be in the long list, because guys, I made a long list to ask God before I got pregnant with her. But then I said, well, God, if I did ask that, why isn't she healthy? And is she right? Did I give this to her? Is it something in my genes,
Right.
or her dad's genes that I passed on? Did I make all the right decisions in the type of medication that I gave her?
Yeah.
Because she has a list of things that's wrong with her. She looks good. She looks healthy. But a lot of people don't know that she has a hole in her navel from the mitrophanol that we catheter through. She has a cecostomy tube in her intestines because now she has a neurogenic bladder and bowel. She has hearing loss.
Yeah.
She has fatty liver disease. She has a mild case of neurocognitive disorder, which is a mild case of dementia, which they say she got from treatment.
Yeah.
So, and that's just only some of the stuff.
Yeah.
So at night, I can't sleep.
Right.
I'm wondering if I made the right choices.
Exactly.
With the medications, with the decisions, and all that stuff. And I had to do it twice by myself with no help. You have people wanting to ask you, tell you, you should do this, you should do that, but they're not there.
And I think
on
that's
that
such a
couch.
great point, because we do have to make these decisions.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have people who have very strong opinions, but they don't have as much skin in the game. And our children love us. And with cancer, the reality is also they become so much closer to us than they would have been if they didn't have this disease. So we become not only the parent, but the friend, the nurse, the decision maker. We become all of the things. And no matter how old your child is, it becomes a greater and greater burden at times. And then we feel guilty about thinking that it feels like a burden because at least we have choice, right? So then we give ourselves guilt for feeling anything else other than gratitude. It is a deep weight. And when our children aren't feeling good and you're the closest person to them, guess who they're going to get frustrated with and angry at? And so the question is, as a parent, how do we withstand that weight? And more importantly, and I would say right now, I think this is especially important because I'm seeing this, and I'm hearing this more from my patients in online communities. There's schisms happening even within our cancer support communities because everybody has an opinion. Everybody's making the best decision they can for their child with what information they have and where they're at and what they're capable of. And so we have to think about what do we need for ourselves to manage the guilt. And when we notice the guilt, look at that trigger and ask, is this something that I have control over or not? And if it is, we're going to talk about what that looks like and how to manage it. And also, am I being a good steward of support to somebody who's with me on this journey who's maybe making a different choice? So let's think about bias. I'm going to tell you about why I'm talking about bias. So cognitive bias, the best example of cognitive bias that I'm going to give you today is something we call confirmation bias. Has anybody heard about confirmation bias? All right, awesome. A couple of you. All right, well, for those of you who aren't familiar, all right, it's essentially how our brain gathers information. All right, I would love to tell you that we are a computer and we are completely realistic all the time and we have absolutely no feelings to go with anything. And maybe that's the case when you're researching something that doesn't matter, like which type of green plant to plant in your front yard. If you don't like plants. If you like plants, then this is a very emotional decision. So just imagine you don't like plants, okay? It doesn't matter. You're like, okay, does it take sunlight? Great. How much sunlight? All right, check. Is it the right zone? Deal. Looks good, right? We don't really care. But when it's something that we care about, we filter everything through the sieve of what matters to us, right? And we filter it also based on what we're being told. And confirmation bias is especially important when it's coming from a trusted source. Believe it or not, if you trust somebody, you are far more likely to go with them than if you trust them a little bit less. We talk about this trust equation, and this goes for your medical team. If you really like your doctor, you're far more likely to have trust and faith that they have you and your child's best interest at heart. If you feel less connected to your doctor, you're going to be asking a lot more questions. If you've made a decision, everything that you read and filter through that, especially if it's a deeply emotional decision, can be tinted with how we want to read it or what we look at, what we see. I would argue, look what's going on in politics right now. And this is not about politics, but again, we use confirmation bias to confirm what matters to us. So two people may make very different decisions in treatment for their children with the same exact diagnosis. And both will have very, very strong opinions. I could give both people the same article and they would read it completely differently. This is confirmation bias at work. And it's part of what helps us, frankly, just get out of bed and keep going, you guys. We need it sometimes. It's its own version of faith. It's the things that keep us going. And the interesting thing is that, again, even the details that we remember will reinforce that. So if I asked you, and many of you raised your hands, do you feel like you missed the idea that your child was ill before the actual diagnosis? Every single one of you will give me a very specific story, and you'll say, yes. On December 17th of 2009, they fell and they had a bump on their knee, and it lasted 3 hours longer than I anticipated, and that was it. We all have these stories. We remember things a certain way. It's just how our brain encodes information. And this is my only nerdy slide, I swear to you. Not there's anything wrong with their nerdy slides, but like I said, this is before lunch. 1960s, cognitive psychologist Carl Cathcart-Wason demonstrated that people have a tendency to seek out information that confirms their existing beliefs. When we don't know, we ask lots of questions. We get lots of information, and then we go through it based on what's important to us. But when we've made a decision or we're leaning a certain way, this is what impacts how we make decisions. And the reason that this is important for you guys in this room is that it all comes down to how do you support each other? How are we a good steward of this community? And also, how are we kind to ourselves when we're doubting ourselves? So let's talk about this. All right. So what do you need in moments of guilt? I'm going to go through these really quickly, and then I'm going to give you my top 5 really important things I want you all to focus on. The first is the concept of self-compassion. Is anybody familiar with the concept of self-compassion? So, one person, thank you. So self-compassion has been an idea that's been worked with through Kristen Neff through Stanford for years now, and it is probably, honestly, one of my favorite ways of managing guilt. And self-compassion is this concept of using things like mindfulness, so recognizing that this is a moment, okay? And then asking, what would I say to somebody that I love that was going through something similar, right? And can I try to say that to myself instead of usually the self-defeating, perfectionistic, rigid thoughts that I apply to myself but nobody else? The second one, reminders of where you've been thus far. I think it's really important for parents to recognize that any single decision you make, it's one in hundreds of decisions that you're making, thousands of decisions you're making. There was a research article at one point that said before a child reaches age 1, parents have to make like 670 decisions. And so when we think about this, again, where have we come this far? Am I doing the best that I can? Am I asking the questions? Am I being kind to myself? Being aware of comparisons. If there's people in your community that are stressing you out and making it harder, it may be worth thinking about whether that's a relationship that you need right now. And that also, I would argue, goes for social media groups. I see a lot of you nodding your heads, and I'm going to say it again because I have feelings about this one. They are a blessing and they can be a curse. So we have to really think about, is this giving me more than it is taking from me? Because when we have a child with cancer, we don't have a lot left in the bank, do we? Oh, another one, mindfulness, like we've talked about, recognizing that these moments too shall pass when we're feeling overwhelmed. Again, focusing our time on supportive people and making sure that those people are really filling our cup as opposed to draining us. Practicing self-validation. You know, our kids seek validation from us all the time, right? They want us to tell us they're doing well. Well, the secret is that we need that validation too, but we don't have anybody to give it to us. Or, you know, in our relationship, we have that person, but they need it also. So can we work on self-validating and saying, you know what, you've done everything you can. You've looked at all of this. No person could spend 500 hours a day researching this. So why do you expect it of yourself? You are doing a great job. Making peace with your inner critic and remembering your values. I think that that is one of the most important things that we lose on this path, is what is really valuable to us. So some final thoughts. First of all, recognize guilt. How many of you recognize when guilt has creeped in? Like a shadow in the night, yeah? Okay, for the rest of you, this is a very good starting place. I would argue that most people actually feel guilt as a physical sensation before it becomes an emotion or a thought. So just start paying attention to it. For those of you who raised your hand, would anybody be willing to tell me what a sign of guilt is? Like when you know you're feeling guilty? You're sorry you raised your hand now, I know. Mm-hmm.
And start thinking, what if the other option was better?
Mm-hmm.
Or if I missed something
Yep.
when the lamp came back.
Yep.
I don't know, something.
Yeah, the what if. The what if thought's a really good one. And really look at those triggers. Sometimes they're people, sometimes they're places, it can be different things, but just really pay attention to it. Another one, find a trusted person. Like we talked about, the importance of trust is so incredibly beneficial when we're feeling guilt and uncertainty. So really think through who those trusted people are and seek comfort and talking with them. And I would also say, if you don't want advice, be really clear before you have the conversation. I don't want advice. And it's okay to say that, because I say this because people have opinions and they're well-intended and they think it's helpful because you're coming to them and they're like, oh God, what do I say? And they're like, I'm going to give them some advice. And it's a platitude. It's meaningless. Even if you're in the same community, even if you have children going through treatment, in your head when somebody else gives you advice, you're thinking, but you're not in my shoes. You're not in the same situation. It's not really the same, and it never is. So it's okay to say, I just need to say this thing that's just weighing me down. I don't need or even want you to say anything. I think I just need to get it off my chest. Is that okay? The person on the other end of that conversation is just going to look grateful and relieved every time. I promise you, but you got to give it a try. Here's a big one. Be realistic about what you can and can't control. Parenting a child with cancer is the worst case scenario. And most of us in a worst case scenario don't become deeply logical beings. It's just science and psychology and reality. We're driven by emotions, and most of those emotions are fear. And oftentimes with fear, we seek control. And oftentimes that control is in the form of education and information, but there's a lot out there. So really think through, what can I honestly control? And who do I trust in my community to have these conversations and figure out what isn't mine to hold anyway that I need to give up because it's taking up too much space that I don't have. Lower expectations. Does anybody here have an MD in pediatric oncology other than over here? No. And we don't expect you to. So lower your expectations for yourself in this. And learn to let go. I think that this is the biggest thing. Is there are going to be times where you are going to be overwhelmed by guilt. And when that happens, it's really important to say, is this something that is going to help me do whatever I need to do next right now? Is this a useful emotion? And sometimes those feelings they drive us to activity. But if it's not, I think it's worth looking at that and examining that either with a close friend, a therapist, a social worker, even your oncologist, believe it or not, and just figuring out, what do I need to let go of? And focus on the positive. Look at what's right in front of you. It's not even like one day at a time. Like, let's take it 1 minute at a time. 1 minute at a time, what are you doing right now? And notice what you're doing well. You're doing a million things well. And if you're not sure and you're here with somebody, maybe on the drive back or the flight back, spend some time telling each other what the other person's doing well, because we don't notice it for ourselves. Just take some time to say, these are the things that you just amaze me with right now. Because sometimes, again, it's a form of validation, but it also reminds us, oh, that's right, I did do that. And think about what your family does to focus on the positive. And if you're sitting here thinking, my family does nothing to focus on the positive, well, then you've got one extra thing to add to that list of appointments you're going to make and people you're going to talk to and things you're going to research. So just write family-positive. So some final thoughts. This is a hard experience for a family to go through. You know that. You're living it. And some of you are brand new to this, just thinking, what am I in for? I don't even know. I'm so confused. I'm so overwhelmed. And some of you have been here for a very, very long time, and you're still feeling the same exact way. I just want to start by telling you, every single one of you, that you are doing an incredible job by just showing up. And just showing up and being present. Nobody slept through this presentation. Well done. And I just want to thank all of you for what you're doing by being here and being part of this community. And I want to encourage every single person to really think about what you can do for yourself and the people around you. Because oftentimes it's not the opinion. There's plenty of those to go around. It's simply just being present. And that is probably the greatest gift that we can give everybody. Our children, our family, our community, but ourselves especially. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hillary. Does anyone have any questions? No? Or
Oh, and I got a question too.
Well, I get maybe more of a statement
Okay.
than a question, but I was just say this is a great topic. I think the decision piece is something that I didn't anticipate going through this. You know, you're kind of pushed like you can do standard treatment, or you can do this other treatment, or you can do this clinical trial, and you talk to this doctor, he says this. You talk to this other doctor, he says that. And all these doctors are way more intelligent than I am, and you kind of, as a parent, you're trying to filter through all this and everything. So anyway, I guess just a thank you to talk about this topic. It's not something that I don't think, at least I didn't anticipate really it weighing so heavy on you as
Yeah.
you're going through the treatment process.
Absolutely.
So.
That's such a good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
anyone else? Yep, got a couple.
I got
Yeah.
two, Pat. Look at
Oh,
this.
This is great. This is great. We like
I know.
participation.
I know.
This is good.
And again, it's before lunch.
I also just wanted to say thank you for bringing up the topic, because I think if you looked at the faces while we were talking, all of us identified with that. Mine's also more of a comment that another parent told me at some stage during the journey, was that you can only make decisions based on what you know at that time. And so for often, you know, a lot of us, I think, look back and, you know, maybe there are stages during treatment where you wish you had made a different decision. But at that moment, the person you were then and the knowledge that you had then, you were trying to make the best decision, and that there's no point in looking back and wishing you had made a different decision because you were a different person back then. And that, I feel like that has been really helpful, and I really appreciate,
Yeah.
you know, hearing that from another parent.
No, I think that's such a great point. It's interesting, my group, yesterday, we were talking about the what ifs and how toxic living in the what ifs can be. And, you know, I think about that with treatment, and just a silly example of that is, I mean, you know, if you went with like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a Britax car seat, and you're like, if only I had the Diono that came out in 2018, you know, it's just, it didn't exist. So we can't live within the realm of the what ifs because we stop living in the now. And so absolutely, I think that's a great point. I know many of you are saying, no, it's not Diono, it's the car seat I have in my car. Anything else?
Yeah, we have one more. Mhm.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I know all of us have struggled with decisions throughout the treatment process. I do have a question about after treatment. My daughter was diagnosed at 2, she is 5, and we're about 18 months out of treatment. And I'm trying to reintroduce her and myself back into society and normal living. And I have a lot more obstacles than I ever expected, a lot more negativity from teachers, from friends I've been friends with my whole life, and telling me how my daughter is, well, first of all, she's a very happy girl, very strong personality, very independent.
I've got a couple of those.
Yeah. But everyone is telling me that she is disruptive, she's too loud, she's manipulative, she's attention seeking, and I need to be, you know, it's my fault. I need to set boundaries. I need to be stricter. And I thought I was doing everything I can. You know, we're working on getting our kids to eat, getting our kids to sleep. You
Right.
know, it's just so much we have to do.
It is, yeah.
And she doesn't have any siblings. She doesn't have any friends. And I really want her to have some connections, but I'm just being met with all this negativity.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do.
So I will say this to everybody. This is not just about your child. I've got 3 children who've never had cancer, and we have the same problems.
Yeah.
And I'm a child psychologist, so you're okay. But I will say this, releasing our children back into the wild is a process, right? When we reintroduce wild animals back into the wild, we have an integration process. And there's exactly that with our children as well. And so all of those things that you described can describe pretty much any parent after treatment who's trying to get their child back out into the world and society. You have a couple other things working against you. I would argue that during COVID, a lot of great things have happened, but I think everybody's lost their social skills. And so I think everybody's ability to state things in a way that is productive has been stripped away. So take that for what it's worth. But there's probably some truth in that for all of our children and for all of their children if they had to get homeschooled for a year and a half. And it's a process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. You know, if your child is with you constantly, you know, and I will say, you know, in pediatric oncology, do our children become a little bit more manipulative? Probably, but they have so little that they can control that they find the few things that they can control and they seek those things out. And that's a learned behavior that we can slowly help them away from in finding other ways of getting attention. Is she attention seeking? Well, she had cancer and she had constant attention for a couple of years. So is she? Yes, probably. Is that okay? Yes. And that too shall pass. But it's a process. And part of what it is that you can't all of a sudden say, all right, we've had absolutely no structure because we're just trying to get through the day and get a meal in your stomach and go from KFC at 2 a.m., Joe, to a situation where you're like, no, you're eating these things called fruits and vegetables. And they're like, I'm sorry, what? And so it's a process. And you have to start with small baby steps. And part of that is just creating a really basic set of structure, giving her new things that she can control, new ways that she can get attention. If she's loud, again, I've got 3 children that are half Italian, so that's just never going to change. Let it go. And I mean, really, honestly, think about what you need to support you in creating this structure, and most importantly, and you guys all know what I'm going to say, sticking to it. Because it's not creating it, it's sticking to it afterwards, right? Because she's going to have a meltdown. It's going to be hard. You're changing the rules. And you need people that are going to support you with that. And if the people around you can't do that, then it might be worth finding people who can and seeking out that support, because you are going to need it. You know, none of us can go this alone. And I would say in terms of schools, I would honestly really encourage you to talk to your oncologist office. Oftentimes we have survivorship programs or people like me that will go to schools and have the conversation for you with the school to
That would be great.
set realistic expectations for everybody. So yes, be kind to yourself. You're doing the best you can.
Thank you.
All right? Yeah, just no more KFC at 2 a.m.
Anyone else? Jennifer? Yeah.
It's very hard. They don't get it.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone else have a question before we break for lunch? No, that's it? Okay, all right, we're done.
All right,
Thank
guys,
you,
thank you.
Hillary. Can grab your lunch in the junior ballroom again.